Monica's hands were tight on the back of the wheelchair, jaw set, eyes cold. Madame Amara's scarf had slipped. A few silver strands of hair lay across her forehead. One more shove, and the front wheel would roll over the raised metal strip at the door. "Monica, please," Madame Amara whispered, her voice shaking. "I am paralyzed. Do not do this to me, I beg you." Monica didn't answer. She pushed again. The front wheel bumped the metal strip. A key turned in the main lock. The door swung open. George stood there, eyes wide like someone waking from a bad dream. "Monica, what are you doing?" The house held its breath. 3 months earlier, George brought his mother to live with them. "Mama, no more steps in the village," he said, lifting her carefully into the car at dawn. "Lecky has an elevator. You will like it." He was the only child of Madame Amara, a woman who had sold gari in the market and later worked night after night to put him through school after his father died. A fall at the farm had broken something in her back. The doctor said she would not walk again. George became a billionaire CEO with offices in Victoria Island, but he never forgot the hands that carried him through rain and hunger. Monica smiled at the gate when they arrived. She wore a silk robe, soft sandals, and a look that tried to be kind. "Welcome, Mama," she said, bending to peck the old woman's cheek. "Your room is ready." The guest room was large, with a warm lamp and curtains like ocean waves. George placed his mother's hands on the window switch. "Press," he said, laughing when she jumped at the soft motor sound. Monica laughed too, but it was a thin laugh, like paper. At first, the days were quiet. George left early and returned late. He thought the two women were learning each other. He wanted peace. He believed love could grow if you gave it enough light. But small shadows started to gather. Madame Amara's breakfast tray would come without the fruits George had requested. Her tea would be cold. The TV remote would go missing until evening. When the driver wheeled her to the garden, the ramp would be blocked by flower pots. Monica would pass by the door and not look inside. Sometimes she would look, and the look would be hard. "Mama, are you okay?" George asked one night, kneeling beside her chair. "You look tired." "I am fine," she said quickly. "Your work is heavy. I do not want to add weight to your head." She tried to smile. She did not tell him that she went hungry for hours some afternoons, or that the nurse was sent away for a break too often. She did not tell him, Monica would whisper, "This is my house," when no one else was near. Mama wanted her son's home to stand. She did not want to be the reason it broke. The more she hid, the bolder Monica became. One Tuesday, rain tapped the balcony. George had traveled to Abuja for a surprise board review and might return late. Monica's phone lit up. It was Nadia, her friend, who always had sharp words, sharp nails, and a sharp laugh. "So she is still there?" Nadia asked. "Ah, Monica, stop acting like a child. Make her uncomfortable. People like that respect only action." "I have tried," Monica said, twisting her robe belt. "She does not complain. George sees nothing." "Then push her to the door," Nadia said softly. "If she cannot walk, she cannot fight. She will tell George she wants the village air. You will smile, and your home will be free." Monica stood very still after the call. The rain slowed. The house was quiet. She walked to the guest room. When she opened the door, Madame Amara looked up from a photo album. The picture on her lap showed a small boy with a school bag too big for his back. George at 10, trying to smile on a day his father did not come home. "Let me help you to the sitting room, Mama," Monica said. Her voice was smooth like oil. "Thank you, my daughter," Mama said, hopeful. "I would like to sit near the window." Monica moved behind the chair and gripped the handles. She did not turn left toward the sitting room. She turned right, toward the front staircase and the great door with the gold handle. "Monica." Mama's fingers tightened on the armrests. "Where are we going?" No answer. The chair rolled, down the top stair. The rubber rims squeaked against the polished edge. Monica pulled, then pushed. Breath short, eyes bright. On the middle landing, Mama tried to hold the wheels, but her hands slipped. "Please," Mama said, voice breaking. "It is not a crime to live in my son's house. I will be quiet. I will be small. Please." Monica reached the last step. The entrance opened wide ahead, white tiles, the world bright beyond the glass. The security guard was far away at the gate, his back turned. Monica set her feet, angled the chair, and dragged. The front wheel kissed the metal strip at the threshold. The gate key turned. The door swung in. George stood there, rain dots on his shirt. What? Monica, stop there! The shout hit the marble and bounced through the house. Monica froze. The wheelchair jolted forward, one wheel now hanging over the drop, balancing between the sunlight outside and the cool shadow inside. Mama's hands flew to her chest. George dropped his laptop bag. His eyes went to the floating wheel, then to his mother's face, then to his wife's hands, still on the chair, and the chair began to tilt. The wheel wobbled dangerously. Madame Amara's frail hands gripped the armrests, her knuckles white. A gasp tore from her throat. George leapt forward and grabbed the chair before it tipped completely. The weight of it nearly pulled him down. But with one hard pull, he steadied it back inside the house. His chest heaved as he lowered his mother gently onto the tiles, his face dark with rage. Monica! His voice cracked, filled with both disbelief and fury. You were about to throw my mother out like trash? Monica's lips trembled. She sank to her knees on the polished floor, the hem of her gown brushing the marble. George, it's not what you think. George's palm slammed against the wall, the sound sharp as thunder. Not what I think. I saw it with my own eyes. I saw you dragging her. Tell me, how is that not what I think? His voice shook. Answer me, Monica. Tears streamed down her face. I only wanted space, George. Since Mama came here, nothing has been the same. She watches me. She judges me. I feel like a stranger in my own house. George turned slowly, his eyes filled with bitter pain. A stranger. This woman is my mother, the one who raised me when my father died. She is the reason this house exists, the reason you even know me today. She sacrificed her legs for me, and you call her presence a burden. Madame Amara lowered her eyes, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. George, don't fight. Please. Her voice was soft, pleading, but her son's heart was already cracking apart. George knelt before her, his voice breaking. Mama, how long? How long has she been treating you like this? Madame Amara tried to smile, but her lips trembled. It doesn't matter. She is your wife. I don't want to destroy your marriage. That sentence, so simple, so selfless, cut George like a blade. He turned back to Monica. Even after everything you've done, Mama still protects you. But I cannot ignore this anymore. Monica's hands shook as she clutched the edge of his trousers. George, please, forgive me. It was Nadia, she kept telling me, Mama would ruin our marriage, that no man should put his mother before his wife. I only listened. I thought she was helping me. At the mention of Nadia's name, George's face hardened. He had always disliked her influence, her careless laughter, her reckless advice. So you listened to a woman who has failed in her own home, a woman with 3 children from 3 men, and you wanted to model our marriage after hers. Monica sobbed, burying her face in her palms. I didn't know what else to do. I was scared you would love Mama more than me. George's voice dropped, heavy and cold. Love is not a competition, Monica. You are my wife. She is my mother. Both can live in peace if only your heart was pure. But you chose jealousy. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the golden wall clock. The chandelier above seemed dimmer. Outside, the sound of Lagos traffic faintly hummed, distant from the storm, tearing the mansion apart. Finally, George stood. He walked upstairs, his steps slow but firm. A few minutes later, he returned with 2 suitcases, Monica's. He dropped them beside her. The thud echoed through the hall like a final verdict. George, please, don't do this to me, she cried, reaching for his arm. I will change. I promise. George pulled his arm free, his eyes cold with disappointment. Go to your friend Nadia. Live with her. Take her advice every morning if you want. But you will not stay in this house one more day. Monica's body shook. She looked at the door, at her bags, and then at Madame Amara, who sat weeping softly in the wheelchair. Shame wrapped around her like a heavy cloth. George, Mama whispered weakly, forgive her. She is young. But George shook his head. Mama, forgiveness is not the same as tolerance. I can forgive, but I will not allow her to harm you again. Never. Monica clung to the last thread of hope. If I go, what will people say? The world will laugh at me. George's lips curved into a bitter smile. Better they laugh at you than bury my mother. The words fell like stones. The driver appeared at the doorway, confusion in his eyes. George pointed at the suitcases. "Take madam to her friend's house," Monica wailed, grabbing the suitcases herself. Her tears blurred her vision as she stumbled out, each step echoing her fall from grace. The great door shut behind her, with a final click. George turned back to his mother. His shoulders shook as he knelt before her. "Mama, I'm sorry. I should have seen this earlier. I should have protected you." She touched his cheek with trembling fingers. "You saw it today. That is enough." But in George's heart, the wound was deep. He knew this was not the end of the storm, and far away, Nadia's phone buzzed with a new message from Monica. "She threw me out. I am coming." What waited for Monica at Nadia's doorstep would be something she never expected. The streetlights flickered faintly as the taxi pulled up in front of Nadia's house. Monica stepped out with her suitcases, her silk gown now wrinkled, her eyes swollen from hours of crying. She stood for a moment at the gate, staring at the compound where she had spent many afternoons, laughing, gossiping, and listening to Nadia's endless advice. "This is where I will start again," Monica whispered to herself, trying to gather courage. She pressed the bell, the metallic buzz echoed inside. Moments later, the curtain at the living room window shifted and Nadia's face appeared briefly. Monica smiled weakly, lifting a hand in greeting. The gate opened, but Nadia did not rush out to hug her. Instead, she leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Monica?" she said flatly. "What are you doing here with bags?" Monica's throat tightened. "Nadia, he threw me out. George caught me. He saw me pushing Mama. He sent me away. You are the only one I can run to." For a second, silence stretched between them. Monica's chest heaved with hope. But then Nadia's lips curled into a thin smile, sharp as a blade. "You thought my house is a dumping ground?" she asked. "Monica, did I sign adoption papers for you?" Monica blinked, stunned. "Nadia, what are you saying? You gave me the advice. You told me to make Mama uncomfortable so she would leave. You said I must protect my marriage." Nadia laughed, the sound loud and cruel. "And you believed me? You really believed I wanted your happiness? Look at me, Monica. 3 children from 3 different men. Do I look like a woman who knows how to keep a marriage?" The truth hit like cold water. Monica stepped back, her hands trembling around the suitcase handles. "So, all this time, you wanted me to fail?" "Yes," Nadia snapped. "Because misery loves company. You always came here with your fine clothes, your billionaire husband, your expensive perfumes. You thought you were better than me. I wanted you to taste what I taste every day. And now you have." Monica's knees weakened. "Nadia, please, don't do this. I have nowhere else to go tonight." Nadia's eyes hardened. She pulled the gate shut and slid the bolt across. "That's your problem, not mine. Carry your load and go. I have enough problems of my own." The slam of the gate echoed like a gunshot in Monica's ears. She dropped her suitcases on the ground and sank to the pavement, her sobs loud in the quiet night. The neighbors peeped from their windows, whispering. A once proud wife of a billionaire now sat like a beggar outside her friend's gate. The taxi driver who had brought her still waited, leaning on his car. Pity softened his eyes. "Madam, where will you go now? Should I take you back to your mother's village?" Monica wiped her tears with shaking hands. "Yes, take me there." Her voice was barely above a whisper. The drive to the village was long, the city lights fading behind her like a dream slipping away. In the quiet of the moving car, Monica's mind replayed everything. George's anger, Mama's tears, Nadia's mocking words. Shame burned in her chest. By dawn, the taxi stopped before a mud house with a sagging roof and cracked walls. An old woman, frail and wrapped in a faded wrapper, stepped out with a broom in hand. Her eyes widened when she saw her daughter with suitcases. "Monica? What happened? Why are you here with these bags?" Monica collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing. "Mama, I lost everything. George threw me out. Nadia betrayed me. I have nowhere else to go." Her mother's face darkened with sorrow. She guided Monica inside the small hut. "Did I not warn you? I told you many times, never let friends enter your marriage. Never let envy guide you." Monica's tears fell faster. "I was blind, Mama. I didn't listen." The villagers soon heard of Monica's return. They gathered in small groups, whispering as she passed. Some of the older women shook their heads. This is the girl we danced for at her wedding to the billionaire. Look at her now." Shame pressed heavier on her shoulders than the Lagos sun ever had. Meanwhile, back in Lekki, George sat in the living room with his mother. The morning light streamed through the wide windows, but his heart was heavy. He replayed the scene at the door again and again, his wife's hands on his mother's wheelchair, the wheel tilting toward the drop. "Mama," he said quietly, "I made a mistake choosing her." Madame Amara patted his hand. "No, my son. She chose her own path. You gave her love, but she allowed poison into her ears. It is not your fault." George nodded slowly, but deep inside, he felt both guilt and relief. His home was finally free of Monica's cruelty, but the scar of betrayal lingered. Still, fate was not finished weaving its threads, because at the year's end, at a grand economic summit in Lagos, George would meet someone who would change his life completely, a woman named Adana. And Monica, now mocked in her village, would watch her life collapse even further before an unexpected act of mercy would pull her from the dust. The story was far from over. The grand hall of the Lagos Economic Summit buzzed with voices. Men in crisp suits and women in elegant dresses filled the room, shaking hands and exchanging business cards. George moved through the crowd, his tailored black suit sharp against the golden lights. Yet his eyes carried a shadow, a heaviness left by betrayal. He had buried himself in work since Monica's departure, but even success felt hollow. His mother, Madame Amara, was the only anchor keeping him steady. As the keynote speaker finished and applause filled the room, George drifted toward the refreshment table. He wasn't looking for conversation, but fate had other plans. A woman in a navy blue skirt suit stood beside him, her hair neatly tied back, her smile warm but professional. She turned, almost bumping into him, a glass of juice in her hand. "Oh, sorry," she said quickly, her voice calm but melodic. "No problem," George replied with a polite nod. But his eyes lingered. There was something grounded in her gaze, confidence without arrogance. "I don't think we've met," she said, extending her hand. "Adana, bank manager at Zedix." He shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "George, I run a company in Victoria Island." Adana's brow lifted slightly. "George Eze? The CEO of Eze Holdings?" George gave a small nod. He was used to people reacting with awe, but Adana simply smiled, as if wealth was the least interesting thing about him. "You spoke during the panel on infrastructure," she said. "I liked your point about creating opportunities for local talent instead of outsourcing everything. Not many CEOs care about that." For the first time in weeks, George felt his lips curve into a genuine smile. Their conversation stretched, easy and natural. By the end of the summit, they exchanged contacts not out of politeness, but because something unspoken had already been planted between them. Back in the village, Monica's life spiraled into ridicule. Every morning, women fetching water from the stream whispered as she passed, "Is that not the billionaire's wife? She's back to her mother's mud house." Children giggled, pointing at her clothes that no longer carried the shimmer of wealth. Even old friends who once envied her avoided her. To them, she was a warning. Her mother tried to comfort her, but her words carried weight too. "Monica, you chased shadows. You let envy enter your heart. Marriage is not about competition. It is about building, not breaking." And as a scrape to smond. In the Unannounced, Monica sat on the wooden bench, staring at the cracked walls of their home. "Mama, I thought I was smart. Nadia told me I needed to fight for my place. Now look, where I am." The older woman shook her head. "Friends who destroy your home are not friends. They only clap when you fall." Monica bowed her head, shame pressing heavily on her shoulders. Weeks passed. George and Adana grew closer. Their calls turned into dinners, and their dinners into laughter-filled evenings. Adana carried herself with grace but also humility, something George hadn't realized he longed for. She listened when he spoke, not to compete, but to understand. When George introduced her to Madame Amara, the old woman studied her quietly, then smiled. "This one," she whispered later to her son, "has a heart that sees people, not just their wealth." It wasn't long before George made his decision. Their wedding was quiet, held in a Lagos church with only family and close friends. There was no crowd of strangers, no excessive display of wealth, just vows spoken sincerely. Adana later resigned from her bank job, choosing instead to manage George's company finances as his account officer. Life slowly found balance again. Adana became pregnant, and 9 months later, she gave birth to twins, Jerry and Jeremy. As Madame Amara carried her grandchildren in her hands, she was full of tears and said, "Now I can rest peacefully." But George and Adana quickly told her she wasn't going anywhere, not yet, until she helps them raise Jerry and Jeremy and give her great-grandchildren. Madame Amara only smiled and said, "My greatest prayer of seeing and carrying my grandchildren has been fulfilled, and I can't ask for more." But George's heart never forgot his promises. One Saturday morning, he drove back to the village with engineers and trucks. Monica's mother stood shocked as workers began tearing down the mud walls of her house. "George, what is this?" she asked, confused. George handed her a folder of building plans. "Mama, I promised before I would rebuild your home. That promise does not change because of what your daughter did. My word is my bond." Tears welled in the old woman's eyes. She clasped his hands, speechless. For 1 month, the village buzzed with activity. Bricks rose, cement dried, and a new modern house took shape where the old hut once stood. When the ribbon was cut, the villagers gathered in awe. Some clapped, others shook their heads in disbelief. Monica was there too, standing at the back with swollen eyes. She couldn't believe it after everything. George still kept his promise. Her heart ached as she remembered Nadia's mocking words, the foolish choices she had made, and the man she had lost. During the ceremony, George turned to her briefly. His voice was calm but firm. "Monica, I am not doing this for you. I am doing it for your mother. But I will also give you 10 million naira to start a business. What you do with it will determine the rest of your life." Monica broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The villagers whispered among themselves, some in shock, others in admiration. It was a moment that shook her to the core. For the first time, she understood. Mercy could break harder than judgment, but as George drove back to Lagos with Adana and his mother, none of them knew that fate had one more twist to deliver, one that would test love, loss, and the bonds of family in ways they never imagined. The mansion in Lekki was unusually quiet that morning. The sun rose slowly, painting golden streaks across the wide windows. George stepped out of his bedroom, adjusting his tie as he prepared for another busy day at the office. But as always, his first stop was not the garage, nor the dining table. It was his mother's room. He tapped lightly on the door. "Mama, good morning," he called cheerfully, pushing it open. The room smelled of lavender and fresh air from the garden below. The curtains swayed gently. Madame Amara lay peacefully on her bed, her scarf neatly tied, her lips curved in the faintest smile. "Mama?" George whispered, walking closer. But something was wrong. Her chest was still. Her hands, folded over her stomach, did not move. "Mama?" George dropped his briefcase and shook her gently. "Mama, it's me. Wake up." No response. His heart pounded. He pressed his ear against her chest. Silence. He shouted for the driver, for Adana, for anyone. Adana rushed in. The twins, Jerry and Jeremy, balanced on her hip. "What's happening?" she cried. George's voice broke. "She's gone." The twins began to wail as if they understood. Adana's tears flowed instantly, her hand clutching the doorframe for support. George sank to his knees beside the bed, his hands gripping the sheets, his body trembling like a child again. By afternoon, the mansion was filled with mourners. Family, friends, church members, and neighbors came in clusters, their voices hushed, their faces somber. Madame Amara's life had been simple, but her story of sacrifice, resilience, and love echoed beyond the walls of her son's mansion. George sat in the corner of the living room, numb, his eyes swollen from crying. Adana knelt beside him, her hand wrapped around his. She whispered comfort, but her own tears betrayed her strength. "She waited," George said finally, his voice hoarse. "She waited until she carried my children in her arms. That was her last dream." Adana nodded, wiping her cheeks. "She left fulfilled." "That is a gift, George." But it did little to ease the sharp ache in his chest. The burial took place the following day in the village. The modern house George had built for Monica's mother became the center of attention again, this time for a far heavier reason. Villagers crowded the compound, some weeping, others recalling stories of Madame Amara's kindness. The pastor's voice rose above the sobs as he spoke about a woman who had given her all for one child, who had carried the weight of widowhood without complaint, who had traded her youth and strength so her son could stand tall. George stood by the casket, his hand resting on the polished wood, his shoulders trembling. "Mama," he whispered, "you will always be my light. Everything I am, I owe to you." When the earth covered the casket, the sound was heavy, final. The crowd echoed with cries, and among the mourners stood Monica. She had arrived quietly, dressed in a simple wrapper, her face pale and swollen from sleepless nights. She watched from a distance, her body shaking with regret. As the crowd dispersed, she walked toward George, her steps unsteady. "George," she said softly, her voice breaking. I am sorry." George looked at her, his eyes hard but tired. For a moment, silence stretched between them, only the rustle of trees filling the air. Finally, he spoke. "This is not about you, Monica. This is about my mother. If you truly feel sorry, then let her memory teach you something. Don't let envy guide you again." Monica lowered her gaze, tears dripping into the soil. "She was a better mother to me than I was a wife to you. I will never forgive myself." George said nothing more. He turned back to the new grave, his heart still bleeding. Weeks passed, and life slowly resumed its rhythm. But the mansion felt emptier without Madame Amara's quiet presence. Sometimes George would walk past her room and pause, half expecting to hear her humming. The silence reminded him she was gone. Yet out of grief came unexpected strength. Adana stepped fully into her role, balancing her duties as both wife and mother, and also as the account officer for George's company. She proved to be not only a partner in love, but also in purpose. Together, they built new foundations, ones rooted in trust, compassion, and respect. The twins grew quickly, their laughter echoing through the halls, and though George missed his mother deeply, he found comfort in knowing she had left behind a legacy, 2 grandchildren who would carry her name and her spirit forward. Monica, on the other hand, lived a different story. Her mother thrived in the new house George had built, but Monica remained a shadow of her former self. The villagers often pointed at her as a warning to young wives. "See what happens when you listen to bad friends. Do not be like Monica." Yet Monica slowly changed. With the 10 million naira George had given her, she started a provision store. For the first time, she worked hard for her own bread, no longer leaning on the weight of a man's wealth. Her bitterness slowly faded, replaced by humility. Whenever young married women came to her store for supplies, she would warn them gently. "Be careful with friends. Not everyone smiling at you wants your happiness. Never let anyone tell you to harm your husband or his family. Learn from me." Her shame became her lesson. Her pain became her wisdom. 2 years later, George stood in the mansion's garden, watching Jerry and Jeremy chase each other around the fountain. Adana sat on a bench, her laughter filling the air as she clapped for the boys. For a moment, George closed his eyes, imagining his mother sitting there too, her hands clapping along, her eyes full of pride. He whispered under his breath, "Mama, we are fine. Rest well." But deep in his heart, the ache remained. Love and loss had shaped him, but so had the mercy he chose to give even to Monica, the woman who once tried to throw his mother out. Because George lived by the lesson his mother had always taught him: promises must be kept, hearts must forgive, and family must always come first. What is your view about this story? Where are you watching from? If you enjoyed this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.